She opens up to you faster than anyone ever has. The connection feels extraordinary, almost meant to be. But 3 months later, you're exhausted, walking on eggshells, wondering how the most promising relationship became your most draining experience. Here's what's actually happening, and it has nothing to do with you being insufficient. You've encountered someone whose early relationships taught them that love comes with conditions, that acceptance must be earned, and that their authentic self isn't worthy of genuine regard. Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, discovered something fundamental about human development. He found that we all have an inherent drive toward what he called self-actualization, becoming the fullest, most authentic version of ourselves. But this drive can only flourish in an atmosphere of unconditional positive regard, where we feel valued simply for existing, not for performing or meeting someone else's expectations. When a child grows up without this unconditional acceptance, particularly from their primary caregivers, something devastating happens. They internalize what Rogers called conditions of worth. These are the rules about who they must be to deserve love. Be perfect, be quiet, be impressive, be compliant, never show weakness, never have needs. The specific conditions vary, but the effect is universal. The child learns that their authentic self is unacceptable, and love is something earned through performance, not freely given. For many women, the father represents the first male figure whose approval they seek. When that approval is inconsistent, conditional, or absent entirely, she doesn't just learn, "My father is unreliable." She learns something far more destructive. She learns, "I am conditionally acceptable. My worth depends on meeting standards I can never quite reach." Love from men is a transaction where I'm always in debt, the paradox of stability. You'd think someone who experienced conditional love would crave the opposite, that they'd be drawn to stability, consistency, genuine acceptance. But Rogers understood something counterintuitive about human psychology. We don't automatically move toward health. We move toward congruence with our self-concept, even when that self-concept is distorted. If her self-concept says, "I am only lovable when I perform correctly," and men's love is unreliable, then your unconditional acceptance creates what Rogers called incongruence. There's a mismatch between her internal framework and external reality. And incongruence feels profoundly uncomfortable. It generates anxiety. So when you show up as genuinely accepting, consistently present, offering what Rogers would call unconditional positive regard, you're not solving her problem. You're triggering it. Your stability contradicts her entire understanding of how love works. Her nervous system, calibrated to conditional acceptance and intermittent availability, starts sending alarm signals. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't match the pattern. Something must be wrong. She's not consciously thinking this, but her organism, as Rogers would say, is responding to the incongruence, and the response is to create conditions that restore congruence, to manufacture the instability that fits her internalized model of relationships, creating familiar conditions. Watch what happens after moments of genuine closeness, after a weekend where you connected deeply, where she felt seen and accepted without performance, where the relationship felt safe and real. You wake up the next morning, and something has shifted. She's distant, critical, manufacturing problems where none existed 12 hours ago. From a Rogerian perspective, this makes complete sense. The closeness activated her organismic valuing process, that deep inner wisdom that knows what's healthy. Part of her recognized genuine acceptance and moved toward it. But her conditions of worth immediately contradicted this movement. Her internalized rules said, "This can't be real, and you don't deserve this without earning it, and he'll leave once he sees who you really are." The anxiety of this internal conflict becomes unbearable, and she resolves it the only way she knows how, by recreating the conditional dynamic she understands. The fight isn't about the content she's arguing about. The fight is her attempt to restore psychological equilibrium by returning to familiar emotional territory. Rogers called this the maintenance of self-structure. Even when our self-concept is distorted and causes suffering, we defend it because it's our framework for understanding reality. Changing it feels like psychological annihilation, so she unconsciously engineers situations that confirm her existing self-concept, even though those situations cause pain. The validation substitute. Rogers made another crucial observation about people who grew up without unconditional positive regard. They develop what he called an external locus of evaluation. Instead of trusting their own organismic valuing process, their own inner sense of what's right and true, they become dependent on external validation to know if they're acceptable. For a woman who didn't receive unconditional acceptance from her father, male attention becomes a proxy for self-worth. Being desired feels like being valued. Sexual attraction feels like acceptance. Physical intimacy creates a temporary sense of being wanted that substitutes for the deeper experience of being unconditionally regarded. But here's the problem Rogers identified. When you rely on external validation, you never develop a secure sense of self. The validation is temporary. It requires constant renewal. And you're always performing for it, never resting in the security of your inherent worth. You'll notice this pattern in the relationship. Physical intimacy has an almost desperate quality. It's not just about pleasure or connection. It's serving a function, temporarily filling a void that can't actually be filled this way. She's seeking through physical closeness what can only be found through psychological acceptance. And after conflicts, you'll see her initiate physical intimacy as a resolution strategy. Not because the issue is resolved, but because physical connection temporarily reduces the anxiety of disconnection. It creates an illusion of repair without the harder work of genuine psychological meeting that Rogers believed was essential for real change. The authentic self in hiding. One of Rogers' most profound insights was about what he called the real self versus the self-concept. The real self is who we genuinely are, our authentic experiencing organism. The self-concept is our idea of who we should be, constructed from internalized conditions of worth. In healthy development, these two are relatively congruent. But when someone grows up with conditional positive regard, a gap opens. The real self gets buried under layers of performance and defense. The person loses touch with their organismic valuing process, their inner compass for what's truly right for them. What you're seeing in her isn't her authentic self. It's her defended self, the structure she built to survive conditional love. The tests she creates, the volatility, the inability to accept your consistency. These are all defensive operations protecting a self-concept that can't tolerate being wrong about how relationships work. Rogers believed that the authentic self could only emerge in relationships characterized by three conditions: genuineness, unconditional positive regard, and empathic understanding. But she can't receive these from you if she hasn't first begun to offer them to herself. The cycle of incongruence. Here's the recurring pattern Rogers would recognize immediately. Short periods of psychological contact, moments where she lets her authentic self be visible, followed by defensive withdrawal. She experiences genuine connection with you. Her real self responds to your acceptance, and then her conditions of worth activate, telling her this connection isn't safe. The same arguments reappear. because they're not actually about the content. They're symptoms of incongruence, manifestations of the war between her authentic self trying to accept your regard and her defended self insisting that acceptance must be earned and can't be trusted. You're not growing together because growth, in Roger's framework, requires a safe enough relationship to gradually dismantle defenses. But she can't experience the relationship as safe enough because safety itself triggers her defenses. The very thing she needs most, unconditional acceptance, is what she's least equipped to receive. Words versus organismic reality. Rogers distinguished between what people say and what their organism knows. Someone can intellectually understand they have issues, can articulate their patterns, can promise change, while their organismic reality remains unchanged. She tells you she loves you. She apologizes. She recognizes her patterns. She might even talk about wanting to change. And she genuinely means it in the moment. But her organism, her deep psychological structure, built over decades, hasn't changed. The conditions of worth are still operating. The incongruence still exists. This is why focusing on her words will mislead you. Rogers taught that we must attend to the whole person, the congruence or incongruence between what they say and how they live. Her patterns, her consistent behavior over time, reveal her actual psychological state far more accurately than her intentions. The question of change. Rogers was fundamentally optimistic about human potential. He believed every person has an actualizing tendency, a drive toward growth, integration, and wholeness. But he also understood that this tendency could only express itself in the right conditions. For her to change, she needs what Rogers called a relationship of therapeutic quality. This requires someone who offers genuineness, unconditional positive regard, and empathic understanding. But here's the crucial distinction. Rogers developed these conditions for therapeutic relationships, not romantic ones. You cannot be her therapist and her partner. These roles require fundamentally different boundaries. As her therapist, someone would maintain professional distance while offering unconditional acceptance. As her partner, you're personally affected by her behavior. You have legitimate needs she's not meeting. You can't maintain the therapeutic stance while also being hurt by the dynamics. Rogers believed in examining the whole system, not just one person's pathology. So we must ask, what draws you to this dynamic? What conditions of worth might you be carrying that make you tolerate a relationship structure that doesn't meet your needs? Some men are attracted to the role of being the one who finally offers acceptance. It feels meaningful, purposeful. But Rogers would ask, are you genuinely offering unconditional positive regard? Or are you offering conditional acceptance, contingent on her eventually changing to meet your needs? If you're staying because you believe your love can fix her, you're not offering unconditional positive regard. You're offering a transaction, your continued presence in exchange for her eventual transformation. This isn't acceptance of who she is. It's investment in who you hope she'll become. Rogers would encourage you to examine your own conditions of worth. Do you believe you're only valuable if you can rescue someone? Do you feel purposeful only when needed? Is your self-worth contingent on being the exception who succeeds where others failed, the path forward? Rogers never believed people were beyond help, but he was clear about what creates change. The person must have some capacity for psychological contact. They must experience at least minimal incongruence that motivates change. And they must be in a relationship offering genuineness, unconditional positive regard, and empathic understanding. For her, this means recognizing not just intellectually, but organismically, that her defensive structure isn't serving her. It means being in therapeutic work, where she can safely explore her authentic self without the performance her conditions of worth demand. It means gradually building congruence between her self-concept and her actual experience. You cannot provide this. You're too implicated in the system. What you can do is maintain your own congruence. Be genuine about your experience. Be clear about your needs. Offer acceptance of who she is, while also accepting your own organismic wisdom about what you need in relationship. Rogers would not tell you to stay or leave, but he would encourage you to trust your organismic valuing process. How does this relationship feel in your body, not just your thoughts? What does your experiencing organism know about whether this is healthy for you? What would it mean to offer yourself the unconditional positive regard you're trying to give her? A woman carrying deep conditions of worth can become a wonderful partner, but only after doing the internal work to dismantle those conditions and build genuine self-acceptance. Some women are actively in this process, doing therapeutic work, making visible progress toward congruence. These relationships are challenging but potentially viable. But many women are not in process. They understand their patterns intellectually, but haven't created the conditions for genuine change. They repeat the same cycles while explaining why they repeat them. They want acceptance but can't receive it. They seek love but defend against it. Your task is to distinguish between these two situations, to evaluate based on organismic reality, not intellectual explanation, to protect your own need for congruence while remaining open to genuine connection. To leave when staying costs more than your own actualizing tendency can bear. Rogers believed deeply in human potential, but he also believed in respecting organismic wisdom, including your own. Her wound is real. Her pain is valid. Her potential for growth exists. But none of that obligates you to sacrifice your own congruence, your own path toward becoming a fully functioning person. You can have compassion while also having boundaries. You can understand while also walking away. Trust yourself. That's what Rogers would tell you. Trust the wisdom of your own experiencing. It knows what you need. Like, subscribe, and share.